Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I haven't done one of the sales videos in a while, and I need to get back to it. But traveling around, I haven't had the time to really kind of focus on it. Got a bunch teed up. I've got a bunch of the Marvel series from the teens. I've got Spawn, which I know a lot of people have been waiting for. Spawn's been difficult. I know people have been asking for it, but also I want to be complete about it. And especially in the first 20 issues or so, there's a lot of additional numbers to come in. I undercount unless I can gather everything. But there's a lot to learn about kind of numbers and things in the past. One of those, and thank you JDC for sending me this way. I guess Tom Brevoort posted on his blog some information kind of about the direct market and how things were going. And this is back in the time he's showing here is kind of a unique period. This is back when the direct market and the newsstand was still going out. And about half, maybe a little bit more of the sales of comics were still coming from the newsstand. And when we say sales in this sense, we're talking about stuff going to the newsstand that is not returned. And I've mentioned this before, but it's important just to kind of stick in your mind because, a lot of people will point to kind of different eras of comics and talk about how much more successful they were. And they were. But you need to understand some of the caveats that go with it, some of what went into that number. And in the 80s and the 70s and kind of eras where there was the newsstand, returnability was a big part of that. That meant that even though you sold 500,000 copies, you could see 300,000 of those copies returned, meaning they're not actually sold. And so from a profitability standpoint, it means that money has to come back. I've talked about that before and there's other videos, but do yourself a favor and make sure you're understanding that because I see every now and then somebody running around going, every comic used to sell 1 million copies. Well, that's not true. And there was returnability in there as well, so the money was coming back. And by the way, returnability is very different than saying, a comic shop orders 200 copies of something and only 150 copies are sold to an end customer, meaning the comic shop is left with 50 copies. It's different. And why is that different? Because a publisher is getting all the money. At no point does a publisher have to go in and give money back to the retailer. No point do they have to accept comics. Now, I say at no point. There's certainly returnability that exists. DC offered it a little bit last year. Companies do that. But in general, the direct market is a one-time sale. Publisher gets their money. And you can say, well, that's cheating. Then that's not really counting comics that are actually being sold to customers. But that's also business. That's when you talk about like the health of, selling soap or bread or things in a grocery store. Not everything sells out. Not everything goes to consumers. There is stuff that gets returned. There's stuff that gets thrown away. The business model is built to protect that, and that's just kind of how this is how finances work. So it's not a cheat. And I think some people have used that as a gotcha, like, well, but how many of these comics really got sold to end customers? In the direct market, it really doesn't matter. I know we want to equate sales to popularity, but that's not the best. It's not the best comparison to draw. And on top of that, comic shops are such a low margin business that comic shops are not just ordering thousands of excess copies of things. They quickly will adjust. But anyway, we're talking about this odd period in the 90s, because that's another era people bring up as doing really well. And the 90s had a huge, speculator burst. And so we're looking in this case at September of 1990, and we're looking at the direct sales ranking for Marvel. And the things that kind of strike you as you look at this is, first of all, Spider-Man, the silver copy, sold over 1 million copies. And Spider-Man Black sold 700,000 copies. You're talking about Spider-Man #1 by Todd McFarlane, sold 1.7 million copies of a comic. And to put it in perspective, I know a bit ago, we were there was that thread where Dan Slott was claiming that his Amazing Spider-Man was one of the top selling comics of all time, and it's like, no, not only was it not, but as we go further down the list, number 3 X-Men 265, number 4 X-Men 266, each one sold 250,000 plus. Amazing Spider-Man 336, 337. Sold over 200,000 copies. In fact, as we go down this list, the crazy part is, just let me read to you, You have Spider-Man, you have X-Men, Amazing Spider-Man Annual, Wolverine. What if? Okay, the 10th best-selling comic for Marvel was What If, number 16, selling 160,000 copies. X-Factor, 160,000 copies. You go down the list with Punisher, Punisher War Journal, Excalibur, New Mutants, Ghost Rider, Web of Spider-Man, Hulk, Avengers, Namor. Everything I'm mentioning sold over 100,000 copies. Namor, number 5, which I believe is John Byrne still doing at that point, 119,000 copies. You get Fantastic Four, 115,000 copies. You have to get down to the 33rd, basically 33 issues of Marvel Comics before you fall below 100,000 copies. The Punisher No Escape sold 103,000. And then Daredevil, right beneath it, the 34th comic, sold 99,000. And that's pretty incredible if you think about it. RoboCop, number 6 by Marvel, 89,000 copies. It's insane to think about how, and this is direct market. Okay, this isn't counting the newsstand. So when you say 1.7 million copies of Spider-Man, that's not counting the Spider-Man that was sold in the in the newsstand. And it's highly, highly likely that Spider-Man number 1 did very well. It's very unlikely there was much returnability, if any, to Spider-Man number 1 by Todd McFarlane. Most of that stuff most likely sold out. How many copies? We don't completely know. I do have some numbers. I need to continue to dig, but it is very safe to say that Spider-Man number 1 was probably in the 2.5 million or higher mark. In fact, that's probably far too low. It's an interesting period because in 1990 we weren't fully into the speculator boom. We didn't have the Image stuff going on. We weren't going heavy into gimmicks. We didn't have too many bagged comics and die-cut comics and variant. We didn't have any of that kind of stuff. We were, by and large, still focusing on core books. By the way, again, direct market. If you get down to the 58th comic Marvel published, you have S.H.I.E.L.D. number 14. That was at 50,000. You get a bunch of comics in here I'm sure people don't even remember. Here's Nth Man. Here's Nam. I love Nam. Here's Stalkers. Here's Alien Legion, which I loved. Alien Legion, unfortunately, 27,450 with the direct market. But basically, I mean, hell, Elf was coming in at 13,850. That's far above, comics. That's far above some of where Miss Marvel was, and even some runs of Captain Marvel. Elf outselling in the 90s. Now, again, the direct market is it's pretty crazy to think about these numbers and think about these numbers in 1990, prior to the speculator boom. It was starting. I think the 2 covers of Todd's issue definitely was starting to get that in people's heads. But you would have the death of Superman. You'd have a bunch of stuff coming up that would go on to sell even higher things. But this is before the big crash. And that collapse that would come definitely derailed all these numbers. It is the interesting thing to kind of, I think, kind of keep in your mind here is that at one point, comics were at this place where the newsstand was functioning and the direct market was functioning, and the numbers were really, really healthy. I mean, what you see here in these numbers where the majority of Marvel's books were over 50,000, and the top 30, the top 35, top 33 were all over 100,000. That was very healthy. And there's a moment in time, from a comic shop perspective, where if you wouldn't have gone all in on the gimmicks, and if you wouldn't have gone in on some of these things, you would have seen, I think, this stabilize. In many ways, this is a snapshot of a good-looking world that was exploited and taken advantage of in much the same way, frankly, that I think people are doing today with an overuse of variants and other things. I think the same kind of warning signs for 2020 are here that existed in 1990, where in some cases there's a good thing going. We're seeing some indies do well. We're seeing some comics with some strength. We're seeing a little bit of revitalized interest in some areas. We're getting some new markets in. but it feels almost inevitable that that same collapse and calamity is going to occur because people didn't learn the lesson from the 90s. Anyway, I thought you might find this interesting, some of these numbers, and it's kind of crazy to look at it. And I do want to thank thank JDC. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Really appreciate it. And to all of you, thanks for listening.